32-year-old nonprofit think tank and was based out of Chicago up until about 8 months ago. Now we're based here in Arlington Heights, a beautiful suburb. Our mission at Heartland is to discover, develop, and promote free market solutions to social and economic problems. Heartland covers all of the major domestic policy areas through our numerous centers. The Center on Budget and Taxes, the Center on School Transformation, our Consumers for Healthcare Choices, our Center on Climate and Environmental Policy, and our newest, the Center on Constitutional Reform. We publish books, policy studies, shorter reports, and 4 monthly public policy newspapers. We also produce podcasts, videos, and host events like the one you're going to see today. As I mentioned, we are meeting tonight in the Andrew Breitbart Freedom Center at the Heartland Institute. We are grateful for our donors and friends of Andrew Breitbart for making a contribution to enable us to dedicate this room to his memory. Andrew was a real champion of freedom, who was never afraid to bring the fight to the other side, and he was a pioneer of using social media to endorse liberty. We are honored that his family and friends allowed us to celebrate his legacy in this manner. If you like what you see tonight, whether you're here in person or watching via live stream, I encourage you to take a look at our website, heartland.org. The majority of our content can be found on that website. We also have a blog, somewhat reasonable. If you're an auditory learner, kind of like myself, you could check out our Heartland Daily podcast on iTunes. If you're a visual learner, you could check out our YouTube channel. You'll find hundreds of videos of past events like this archived there. Also, if you like books, check out our Michael Perry Mazur library to my left and your right. It's quickly becoming one of the best collections of books on liberty and free markets in the Midwest. And if you enjoy this event and you want to be invited to the next one, please sign up using the forms that you find on our tables, maybe in the back there as well. The form will give you the opportunity to be a volunteer, to write for us, or to become a donor. But like I said, tonight we have a very exciting event for you. 4 speakers from Austria, Germany, and Iceland are here to provide an international perspective on 2 topics: the role of the state and the American dream, and freedom and responsibility. They are with us today thanks to the Austrian Economics Center, a politically independent research institute based in Vienna, Austria. They are committed to the creation of a free and responsible society. Today's program will consist of 4 speakers, and we hope to have a lively Q&A session at the very end. Our speakers tonight will be Federico Fernández, Senior Fellow with the Austrian Economics Center, Hannes Gisjuraisen, Professor of Political Science at the University of Iceland, Barbara Kolm, President of the Friedrich von Hayek Institute and Director of the Austrian Economics Center, and Karl Peter Schwartz, a well-known journalist currently engaged at one of the most important newspapers in the German-speaking area. But please join me in welcoming our first speaker to the stage, Hannes Gisjuraisen. Hopefully my pronunciation was close enough.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the pleasure and privilege to invite me to give a short talk here from the perspective of somebody from one of the Nordic countries. Yes, if we look at it very briefly, then we see that we can distinguish between 2 kinds of countries with 2 kinds of income distributions. And I'm just going to show them to you. And the first one is perhaps a Nordic country. There the income distribution is quite even, but the poor are slightly worse off than they are in the other country. Perhaps the other country could be a typical state in the Midwest of the US. There the condition of the poor is slightly better than in the Nordic country, but the income inequality is much less. The inequality is much higher. So the question is, which has preoccupied political philosophers, which is the better country? And John Rawls, he would grudgingly admit that The second one, the one below, would be better because the condition or the living standards of the poorest are slightly better there than in the other country, whereas Thomas Piketty, the new prophet of the left, he would say that the Nordic country would be better because income distribution would be more even there. So you see that there are different perspectives on this, but I'm going to discuss this a little bit from the point of view of a Nordic person. And first I would like to say a few words about the productive powers of capitalism. If you look at it, it's so enormous, it is mind-boggling, staggering how we have really gone from poverty to affluence in the last 300 years. As Milton Friedman once said when he visited Iceland, capitalism is the most efficient machine that has ever been invented to turn people from poverty to prosperity. And there are all kinds of side effects of capitalism. For example, much less violence than in the past, as you can see here. And just one thing that we take for granted, but is not at all so, is water-related diseases, much less now than they were in past centuries. All this means improvement in the quality of life. That's what I'm here about. Not only GDP per capita, but quality of life. And look at another thing, which is the green revolution. We are more or less cultivating the same landmass as we did 30 or 40 years ago, but we are producing much more. And this is because capitalism has, with its innovation, entrepreneurship, and free trade, provided us with food and solved more or less the food problem in the world. And what we also see is that the doomsday prophets of yesteryear, they were wrong when they thought that we were caught in a Malthusian trap, that the population would continue to increase at a faster rate. It is not so. The increase in the rate of population is slightly going down. So we are not getting as many as in the past. So we are escaping the Malthusian trap. But I would like also, before I turn to the comparison of our Nordic countries and the US and Canada, perhaps, the North American countries, to discuss a few other examples just to illustrate the general fact of the enormous capacity of capitalism to eradicate poverty. We have, because people sometimes admire the achievements of mainland China in the last 20 or 30 years, we tend to forget that there are 4 Chinese economies, those of Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan, as well as that of mainland China. It's very interesting to compare them, but it's also very interesting to compare other countries that are somewhat similar in background, like Australia and Argentina, and take 2 tropical islands that were both former British colonies, the small islands, Jamaica and Singapore. Very interesting to compare all these countries, and I'll just briefly go through that. Here you can see the GDP per capita in the 4 Chinese economies, and just for comparison, I put also in there the EU and the US GDP per capita. And you can see that even if we have seen a lot of progress, a lot of economic growth in mainland China, how the other Chinese economies have really outperformed. Even the US, Hong Kong and Singapore have now higher GDP per capita than the US. And of course one of the reasons for that, or even the main reason, is that they are about the freest economies in the world. This is a comparison that is often made between Australia and Argentina. In 1929, those countries were more or less enjoying the same living standards, but you can see the development since then in Australia on the one hand and in Argentina on the other hand. And, people don't really disagree so much about the explanation for this stunning graph. It is that Australia has maintained the old Anglo-Saxon tradition of liberty under the law, respect for private property rights and the rule of law. Whereas Argentina, unfortunately, has fallen prey to demagogues and populism and rabbles a bit similar to that we saw in the Roman Empire that had to be fed with bread and circuses, as you may remember from your old history books. Another comparison, sometimes not made, is between those 2 tropical islands, both former English colonies, namely Jamaica and Singapore. And you can see from the graph that the GDP per capita in Jamaica was actually larger in the 1950s, early 1950s, than in Singapore. But then you can see how Singapore has really taken off because of the economic freedom that they enjoy in that island. So the evidence really, if you look at the Chinese economies, the four of them, if you look at Argentina and Australia, if you look at Singapore and Jamaica, is overwhelming. We do not need the old examples that we used in the Cold War between East and West Germany or North and South Korea. We have those comparisons. But what I would like to do is to draw your attention to the fact that we may have 5 Nordic countries, and I come from one of them, and I really love and like my country, but there are also other northern economies existing. And I think it is very interesting to compare them to our Nordic countries, namely some of the Nordic states in the US and Canada. Because, for example, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Manitoba, they are more or less northern countries, populated by people of Nordic origin and with a cold climate. And let us compare a few of them to the Nordic countries. Here you can see the GDP per capita in Minnesota in 2010, here in South Dakota, here in Manitoba, Sweden, Iceland, Denmark, Finland. Isn't this rather interesting that the North American Nordic countries do much better economically than the Nordic countries? I leave out of the comparison, of course, Norway and North Dakota because they have oil wealth that confuses the picture, but it's really thought-provoking to see this, that the northern countries in North America do much better than the Nordic countries in Europe. And another very telling comparison is between Swedes in Sweden and Swedes in the United States, because we have got some data on that. Here is the GDP per capita of 3 groups. One is the Swedes in Sweden. That was about $37,000 to $38,000 per person. Then the average in the US in 2008, and then the average of the Swedish people in North America, in the US. And you can see that the Swedish North Americans, they did much better than the Swedish Swedes. Why is that? It is not because the North American Swedes are any better than the Swedish Swedes. It is because in America you have had a dream that has come true. And that dream is based on private property rights, on respect for the rule of law, on admiration for the heroes that create wealth, and on free trade. This is really what explains, in my opinion, the difference between Australia and Argentina, the difference between Singapore and Jamaica, and the difference between the Nordic countries in Europe and the Nordic countries in North America, and the difference between the living conditions of the Swedes in North America and the Swedes in Sweden. And we also should be aware of the fact that the greatest news item in the 21st century is not really the financial crisis of 2008 to 9. It is that many hundred millions of people in India and China have migrated from destitution, from poverty, to something of affluence. And you can see here how the income in absolute terms has risen of the 90% that were poorest in China. And this is because China has joined world capitalism. It maintains a one-party state, it maintains a dictatorship, that's true, but it has basically adopted capitalism in many ways. And Thomas Piketty has recently posed a challenge to capitalism, and he believes that the income inequality has increased, and that is a very bad thing. But I think that there is a lot of comments that we can make on his data. One thing, for example, is that the living conditions today, the opportunities today, the quality of life they have today are much better than they were 100 years ago. And Thomas Piketty and the protesters on the streets, they are very concerned about the 1%. The 1% richest people with the highest income. But why are they so rich? I believe that there are interesting explanations for at least some of the very high income that we see of the super rich, namely the 1%. One is that some people with special non-replicable skills, innovators, entrepreneurs, entertainers, and athletes, they have qualities or abilities that whose supply is fixed, but the demand is flexible. And what has happened with globalization, with free trade, with the internationalization of the economy is that those people with fixed abilities, they are facing now a market of almost 7 billion people, whereas they only sold their abilities to about 300 or 400 million people in 30 years ago. So globalization is the common cause of the two phenomena that I have been discussing here, namely the migration of the Chinese and Indian poor people into the middle class, and the emergence of people who are super rich, the 1% that are able to derive very high incomes from their ability to sell on the international market. And then, just briefly, anyway, to challenge Piketty and left-wingers today, what is wrong with inequality? Let me just tell you a short tale. We have a country, Iceland, let us say Iceland, with an income distribution D1. And then, as really happened, Milton Friedman, he comes to Iceland to give a lecture. He came as my guest in 1984, and he gave a lecture there that is still held in good memory by the Icelanders, and you can actually watch a hilarious television debate between Friedman and 3 Icelandic intellectuals on YouTube. If you just Google Friedman and Iceland, then it will come out. He gives the lecture. 1,000 people attend. Each of them give him $50. Afterwards, Friedman is $50,000 richer, and 1,000 people are $50,000 richer, and 1,000 people are each $50 poorer. So we have a less equal distribution, D2, in Iceland as a result of this. And what is the problem? Everybody is happy. Both Friedman, carrying the money with him back, and the Icelanders who enjoyed his lecture. Where is the injustice? So what is really wrong with inequality if it is distribution by choice? If it is the principle that we can call from each as he chooses, to each as he is chosen. Distribution by choice. That is really the essence of capitalism. You can freely dispose of your income, and the result of your choices is that some people get very rich because they are in demand, like Friedman with his lectures. I was ordered to speak very briefly, so I really can't go on to make a lot of points that I would like to make. So I'm just going to conclude with an observation. In Lewis Carroll's novel on Alice in Wonderland, there is the phenomenon of the Red Queen. And the Red Queen has to run in order to stay in the same place. And that's what we have to do in life. And that's what capitalism forces us to do. And that's the reason for the two facts about capitalism. One is how effective it is, and secondly, how unpopular it is with some people, because it forces all of us to be on the move, to adapt, to adjust, to create, to do all kinds of things. And the real challenge that we are facing, both in Europe and the US, is how we are going to keep up, how we are going to run in order to stay in the same place. That is to say, if you look at the proportion of gross international product of these 3 systems, the EU, it has gone down, the US a little bit less, and you can see the enormous challenge that China and India poses to us. And what is the answer to that challenge? It is freedom. Thank you very much.
All right, so then our second speaker today would be Federico Fernández.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I'm very happy of being with you this afternoon. I'm very happy that the Heartland Institute hosted us in this magnificent room. So thank you. And Donald asked me to try to keep my presentation under 10 minutes, and I will do my best to do so. I originally wanted to talk about how Argentina is being portrayed as a role model, unbelievably, but surprisingly, it's being portrayed as a role model in some European countries. I'll talk briefly about that. But given some very interesting talks that I had with some of the people in my table and with Joseph, I will go directly to some of the developments that we have had in the last years and how they show the failure of the state, really, and the failure of managed economies. So let's go. Firstly, since I'll be basically bashing my own country, I am from Argentina, I will tell you before that it's a very nice country. It has a lot of very nice things. You could come visit, you know, it has, this is the Patagonia in the south, this is the north, very beautiful. We have very good wine in Argentina, Malbec. If you can buy a Malbec, it's very good. Buy the cheapest one you can find. They are all great. This is our some of our national heroes, football players. This is great one. He'll be playing in the US here in a couple of months. So if you have the possibility, we play polo very good. And of course, this is probably our best thing, the Argentinian meat. Unfortunately, some other things are not going that well, as you will see. So let's go. Argentina has grown quite reasonably, but it hasn't been a boom at all. It has had a lot of problems, but I want to show you quickly this. Argentina is a country which is very much related to the agricultural sector. It has always been like that. This is what had happened with the prices of soy, which is our main agricultural commodity nowadays. This is what has happened since 2001. You can see 2001, the price was $150. It peaked at one point over 600. Now it's around 300. So Argentina should be, if everything you sell, the prices skyrocket, you should be a success story. Argentina should be a great country. Everybody should be investing in Argentina, say, hey, let's buy land in Argentina and produce everything. Nothing like that has happened. So why is that? If with this international context, why the Argentina is not a success story to be told now? This is a public school in Argentina. This picture is from last year. We haven't been attacked by ISIS or something. We are not at war. But unfortunately, this is the state of the public school. Sorry to hear that. This is a state of a hospital. Terrible. This is some of the roads. If you like dangerous driving, you can come to Argentina. Pick a truck and drive in these roads. And this is what and perhaps this is one of the reasons why we are not a success story. With that windfall, with those great international prices, what happened? Oh well, we have spendaholics in charge, and this is more or less what happened with the government expenditure over the GDP. Numbers that we have not seen in history, close to 40%. Remember, to have these roads, we pay. Again, fiscal burden, and here I want to tell you a couple of stories about. This is, again, never seen in Argentina's history. This number, which is a research that a very good friend of mine, a very brilliant Argentinian economist named Nicolás Kachanowski is publishing, is something that he has to do privately, because for the past 4 or 5 years, all the national statistics have been basically faked. So the government didn't want to know us, didn't want us to know the exact state of the economy, so they faked the numbers of inflation, of taxes. But probably this is close to 50%. Well, according to the World Economic Forum, the total tax rate of Argentina is 137%. It's the worst country in the world. Of course, we don't pay that much because we would all be dead. But that is the total tax rate. And a couple of more things regarding taxes, particularly. One of the first things that our government did with those very good and very positive for us international prices was to start probably one of the most exotic taxes that you can charge to your population, which is export taxes. Our exporters, our soy exporters, for instance, have to pay a tax to export soy to China or to other countries in the world. The same with corn producers or beef producers. It's unbelievable. They started in 20%, and of course, they have to pay all other sorts of taxes: income tax, land tax, property tax, etc., etc. But just out of every dollar you export, originally was 20%. Then it was raised to 30%. It was re-raised again to 35%. At one point, and this caused a huge crisis, they wanted to put it in 90%. That was too much. Yeah, that was too much, and there was almost a revolt, and they had to stop that. But until a couple of months ago, for every dollar you exported, 35 cents went to the state to have those roads, those hospitals, and those public schools, among other things. The second thing that happened with taxes in Argentina is that they created a system which is completely insane. Our IRS, our tax agency, issues approximately 2 new laws or tax laws every day. Not even it's 40 a month. Not even accountants know exactly how much you should pay, when, to whom. So with this, they created a situation which is very convenient, not only that you have to pay a lot of taxes, but every taxpayer is basically also a tax dodger, because you are always in fault. You are always not paying what you should pay, because you don't even know what you have to pay. Not even your accountant knows. And this was very helpful for the government, because instead of creating their own secret police and, killing the dissentants, they sent the IRS to you, our national IRS to you. So many journalists who opposed the government had visits of the IRS, and you basically become a civil dead person, because you can't do, when you are suspended by the tax agency, you can't do any business at all. You can't issue a receipt if you provide a service. The same with certain newspapers, with some economists. They even were called terrorists, and the anti-terrorism law was tried to be used against certain economists who were publishing the real numbers of the economy. So basically, the tax policy and what prevented Argentina to be a success story in this past 12 or 15 years was this two-headed monster that the state created using the tax policy. It was one of the heads, of course, was to try to extract as much resources you can extract from the population, and you are seeing now how far they have come. The other head, which was even more dangerous, was to create a sort of state secret police that harasses you and even can send you to jail if you dare to oppose them. So taxes basically and government spending has been a complete curse on us, has done anything good for us. And a couple of more graphs to show how this success story has been has been transformed into a complete failure. These are the numbers of the central bank. It was basically looted by the government. And sovereign debt. Another great, I don't know why they are all smiling, but the only thing that they do is to, and this is when you see, when you see this, we choose, oh, they are paying. No, that was a default. They defaulted, then renegotiated the debt, and then, but they started again. And please bear in mind that from this point up to this point, Argentina had basically the financial markets closed. That is basically debt that they issued against future retirees people, future against the social system. It's been a complete disaster. It's been a complete disaster. And what prevented Argentina of being a success story is basically this terrible tax policy and this growth of the state and this authoritarianism by the state. I hope, of course, the US it's light years away of this terrible situation, but Argentina wasn't always like this. It used to be a very progressive country in the sense that it grew a lot and attracted a lot of people, a lot of immigrants, and this is due to the growth of the state, unfortunately, our current state. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, our third speaker of the night is Barbara Colm. Okay, Karl Peter Schwartz. I saw you walking up. I thought we were changing the pace.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a big honor and a great pleasure to be here at the Heartland Institute. I follow the work of this institute since years, and I'm very glad that I have the occasion and the possibility to be here and to see what is done in this beautiful place. You probably know that there is one big issue in Europe since summer last year, and this is the migration issue. In a certain sense, you can say that this is also the case in the United States, at least judging from the primaries and the discussions going on. And there are certain analogies between the American situation and the European situation, but as any country has its own socialism, America has its socialism, the European Union has its socialism. It's always socialism, but it's different, a little bit different. So also the migration question is different in Europe and in the United States. I would like to start with the fact that migration as such has always been a case in history of mankind. So it's nothing new, and it was not always negative. It had sometimes positive features. The whole story of the United States is unthinkable without this contribution, because it's a story of immigration. And it has also negative consequences sometimes. And there are three reasons, I would say, that are, or let's say only for two reasons that bring people to move. One is because they want to get rid of violence, could be war or revolutions, or simply because they want to improve the situation, because they see that in another country they have better possibilities to develop themselves, to pursue their own happiness. So this is the fact is, for instance, Europe between 1820 and 1940 exported 60 million of migrants. No? 40 million of them came to the United States, the other to other countries. We have since 1945, we have about 60 million black Africans living in different countries. I think 15 million in the United States, 15 million in the European Union, then in the Middle East and in the Asian countries, all together. And you can't put all these stories on the same level, because they are very different and they have different outcomes. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative. Now, take a look Germany, which took the bigger part of the immigrants in the last year. without succeeding in integrating them, but trying to get them in, had a story, a similar story of, a much more dramatic story of immigration, which happened after 45. You probably know that 12 million Germans left the eastern part of Europe between 45 and 48. This was the result of the disastrous policy of Adolf Hitler and the breakdown of the German state, and the revenge from the Slavic people who have been under Hitler's terror regime, and also as a certain kind of pressure from Stalin, no? Because Stalin expected, when the Germans leave the eastern part of Europe, no, and they come in a country which is Hungary, which has been completely destroyed by the war, and then you bring other 12 million people who have to be fed and find a job and whatever in this country. In Stalin's idea, no, this must have led to a revolution. No? And you know that the communists, for the Soviet communists, it was always important to have Germany. No? This was already after the First World War, because Germany was the bridge from Moscow to the rest of the world. No? It failed after the First World War, and it failed also after the Second World War. Notwithstanding this help or this immigration element. Because history surprises us with its unintended consequences sometimes. Because what happened was a completely different development. Here you see, I don't know who knows Ludwig Erhard. Ludwig Erhard had an importance for Germany, but you could compare it what Margaret Thatcher did for the UK or Ronald Reagan for the United States. So he implemented free market reforms. And in a few years, the German economic disaster transformed itself in an enormous success story, which was called this Wirtschaftswunder in German. That means the economic miracle. And what were the elements of these economic miracles? Particularly three elements, I would say. One is sound economic policy, introduced by Erhard. The second element, the pursuit of happiness for the Germans. They wanted to get rid of their past. They wanted to have a new beginning, to start and to live in a prosperous and free society. And the third element was also that these immigrants came, these 12 million Germans, because they spoke the language. They were highly motivated. They wanted to work. They were diligent. And introducing themselves into Germany, they brought an element of modernization and innovation, which was quite helpful, because what you need for a flourishing economy is not only a good policy and not only good intentions, but you need also technicians, qualified workers, people who integrate themselves easily in new production processes and so on. And Germany had all the things, so it was an enormous success story. And don't forget, it were 12 million Germans, 12 million Germans. But exactly 10 times of the immigrants we had in the last year. It was 1.2 million immigrants from Syria and the Near East that came to Germany. I show you the figures. So there you see a Syrian immigrant refugee with a picture of the Chancellor Angela Merkel. You remember that in the first week of September she invited the Syrian refugees and said, please come to us, we invite you, and we want to show you a friendly face. And people who already were in Hungary, and in Hungary there were already the facilities, they could have had shelter and everything, but they didn't want to stay in Hungary, they wanted to go to Germany. So look at the figures on the left side. You see the asylum applications in Germany were in 2005 42,908. And that remained more or less until 2012, and then from year to year it was increasing, which was the effect of, well, in a certain sense of the rather idiotic American policy to bomb down Libya and to arm the opposition in Syria and to destabilizing these countries, because this was one of the outcomes of this, what we have now. And then you see the 127,000, and then it's increasing. And last year we had in Germany 476,000 and something, and in the European Union 844,000. But those 476,000 is a little bit misleading, because about 500,000 have not been even registered. So you have to put together 500,000 plus the plus 476,000 at least, yeah? And then you arrive of about 1 million, 1,000,002, which is the estimation of the people coming to Germany. So Germany had the most or the biggest percentage of refugees, and accept the biggest percentage of refugees. Why? And one of the reasons is that there was an open border policy just before. No? So there were already Syrian immigrants in Germany in certain communities, and for other refugees coming there, it's always helpful if they have family members already in Germany, and so they help them, they can organize them. That is quite natural. But there is another factor, and this factor are the pulling factors by German social policy. Yeah? So an immigrant in Germany, an asylum seeker, gets free shelter and provision, no, so he can eat, and then he gets 145 euro in his hand. No? So if you compare this with the salaries paid in other countries, also in countries of the European Union, in the poorer countries of the European Union, for instance, Romania or Bulgaria, for them this is just a respectable income. Yeah? I remember I was last year as a journalist in Albania, when there were also many Albanians who tried to come to Germany. And I spoke to an Italian entrepreneur who produces textiles in Tirana, which is the capital of Albania. And he told me for him this was a problem, because there were qualified workers in his factory who preferred to get out of the job and come to Germany, stay there for 7, 8, 9 months, because this is the length of an asylum procedure, and then they stay here, and in the meantime they get the money, and if they bring their women and their children with them, the money is always more. No? So that this is what the Albanian minister for domestic affairs told me, that the asylum applicants in Germany get more money than a policeman who has to pay for his family in Albania. So obviously that they move. You can't even criticize them, because it's a logical thing. The problem doesn't stay with them. The problem stays with the German social policy system. Yeah? So that's the reason why they come. Now, what Merkel wants, no? Mrs. Merkel wants, is to hit this, let's say, deficits of the German policy, no? And to masquerade it, and then to find a solution to send them to the other countries. It's a little bit like imagine that I would say I would publish, would say, all the people here from Arlington, invite them to my house this evening for dinner. Yeah. And then when there are 500 and waiting, and I open the door for 5 or 6 because I have no more place, and then I say, well, go to the other neighbors. Yeah? And the other neighbors haven't been asked by me. Yeah? So they are rather surprised, because the Slovaks, the French people, all the others, they didn't want this. The British don't take them, the Portuguese don't take them, the Spaniards don't, only Germans. Swedes and Austrians, who for a few months followed the German model, were completely overwhelmed by this development. Then the Swedes and the Austrians closed the border, with the effect that immediately, because I show you where this is. You see, this is they come from Turkey. No, there is Syria. Yeah. Then from Turkey, and they cross the sea there, and then come to Athens. And until February, it worked like this: that the Greeks, all organized by the government, brought the refugees in buses and trains to the Macedonian border. Then the Macedonian government took over. Then the Serbian government, and the Croatian, Slovenian, Austrian, and everybody organized it that they in the shortest time possible that they all arrive in Germany. No? Now the problem was that in Germany there was a resistance against this policy, and for Mrs. Merkel it became a little bit dangerous, and she had to find a solution. But she didn't want to correct it. But she wanted to cover up what happened. So Austria and the others were heavily criticized for Germany for closing the border, because first it was only the Hungarians that constructed fences against this invasion. Now also Slovenia has, the Croatia, all these countries, Austria have fences and certain kinds of similar in the south of the United States. Yeah? Not perfect, but still already working. No? The figures are going down, and before it was 5,000-6,000 people a day who came. No? Now it's about 5, 6, 7 people. So that's not my problem. But what Mrs. Merkel wanted to do is a kind of, this is Mrs. Merkel links, yeah, in the left corner. So what she wants to do is simply to find an agreement with Turkey, and that agreement that has been already signed, but I don't think that it will work. Exists that when immigrants come, illegal immigrants were sent back to Turkey, and Turkey may send for every immigrant another one who legally enters the European Union, but Turkey should control the border and should make sure that they don't cross the sea. There is no interest from the Turkish part, but because if they can get them back, yeah. So for them is why should they control? Why should they control? They have no incentive to do it. Then in the meantime they get 6 billion euro from the European Union. Nobody knows how they will be used. There is a civil war going on in the eastern part of Turkey against the Kurdish nation there. So another thing which was promised by Mrs. Merkel was the visa-free regime with Turkey, so that Turkish can enter the European Union without problems as every other. This would mean that people fleeing from the civil war zones, not only from Syria but also from Turkey, will arrive in Germany. So there is no way out. What can be done? What can be done is only diminish the pull factors, social policy, open the labor market so they can at least work when they come, don't allow parallel societies in which there is no kind of control anymore from the side of the German authorities, ask them to assimilate to take the lifestyle of Germany, and let the people decide. No? We should not forget this is the first big-scale invasion from a culture which is strange to the European culture. It comes from the Middle East. So all Islamic countries, Muslim countries. In every country where there were always problems with Muslim communities, and the more Muslims you have in a country, the more problems you have, and the more dangerous situations could occur, as we saw recently in the terrorist attacks that we had in Paris and in Brussels. So the situation is rather gloomy. I don't see any change. Everything is done against the declared will of the population. For instance, the government, as in Germany or also in Austria, is overruling with law change, with legislative changes, overruling the communities. So that's often the case that the communities say we don't want to take them, but fact is that they are forced by the government to do it. No? This is one of the reasons why you have this arson attacks against houses which should serve for the immigrants as a shelter, which is done mostly by rightist extremists, but there is a certain popular consent with this, because they know that if you imagine it, you live in a small village with 2,000 inhabitants, and the government sends you 200 Syrians who don't work, who stroll around the day, who not all or some of them are molesting and harassing the women there. They have particular problems. They are violent and whatever. No? So the people don't want them, and it's also a problem of the prices of their houses, because if you have one of these asylums in your village, the value of your house and of your apartment is going down, because nobody wants to move there. No? If you have the intention to sell it. So there are dangerous developments, because there could be a violent backlash from the German population. Unfortunately, it did not happen yet, but it could happen. And I think that the German government would be well advised to make a radical change in its immigration policy. Thank you very much for your attention.
And our last speaker for the night, before we do our Q&A session, Barbara Combe.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Joe Bust and the Heartland Institute for hosting us tonight. Since this topic is about freedom and responsibility, I think this is the institution that was very relevant when it came to climate change topics and when it came to fight Kyoto. And I think they were the first ones to touch upon it and to also bring this case to Europe and to help the European think tanks to fight this war against those fearmongers. And freedom and responsibility is also important to many of our partners, and the Templeton Foundation has helped us bring this roadshow, Why the US Must Have Become Europe, to the United States. And I would like to discuss three, oops, can you change the slides, please? I mean, I can talk about migration as well, of course, being a European, and this is one of the hottest issues right now that we see. But I would simply like to focus on three things that we nowadays face in Europe. The one under the European Union, not Europe, the European Union, it's not the same. We face the so-called financial crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, which was nicely tied into one package by Chancellor Merkel when she said the euro has to survive, otherwise the European Union is doomed. So tying this was, from a political perspective, a very smart move, but those things, as we all know, don't have anything to do. But because the public bought it so easily, we have a whole bunch of consequences right now that we have to face, and those consequences are the bailouts of Greece. I mean, the third bailout has just happened. We are now with 300 billion that have been consumed, where taxpayers' money has been redistributed, and I'm talking now on redistribution levels, not from the local, from the national. No, we have added the supranational redistribution now in Europe. And I think this is a level which is really endangering not only our competitiveness, but actually our survival as a continent and as a society. So this is one thing. that we have seen. The second problem, as a consequence of this bailouts, where of course, how do you fix this? We have gone through so-called austerity programs, but to be honest, apart from Ireland, I haven't seen a single country in Europe that really has done, in the past movement, that has done those that has undergone those structural reforms and that has cut their spending. And I will go through that in a little bit. And as a next consequence of this so-called sovereign debt crisis, we now think loudly about helicopter money, about what the Fed has done for a long time, printing money. The ECB has done that, and we now already have negative interest rates. ECB has just done that in February. So as a consequence of that, how will companies, how will enterprises be productive? And if we look at the numbers and figures that we see, so during the past 15 years, the industrial productivity has shrunk in Greece by 28%, in Italy by 21%, in Spain and Portugal by 18%, and in France by 15%. The only country that is delivering, that is of course contributing here, is Germany with a productivity rise. The only country with a rise is 20% is Germany. And as we know from all the news and what we have seen now from Karl Peters' presentation, Germany tries to push and get Europe out of the mess. But this is not possible, because we have, with this negative financial politics, because we tied fiscal policy with monetary policy. We throw it into one basket. And we use this one-size-fits-all solutions all over. So it's not only on the monetary and fiscal sector, it's on the regulatory sector, and it's on the legal sector. And this doesn't work with a European Union of 29 nations that are different, where we have different legal systems, we have different languages. It's really not possible. So with these levels of productivity, you will not create growth. And the lack of growth creation is one of the biggest problems that we face in Europe. Here. Yep. I just simply would like to go through a couple of slides. This was the forecast of 2015. If you look, there are only 2 countries with a growth level of above 3%. To be honest, if we look at what is happening for the forecast for 2016, and Greece with a forecast of 3%, this is a joke. This is what we deal with. So the next thing we see is there is Brussels living in a parallel universe to the other nations and the individuals and the citizens of the European Union that have to deal with reality. So you have this crazy centrally planned part in Brussels, and the rest is reality where people think and work and where they have to face those problems. QE, inflation, and of course spending, this big part of spending. Another issue that we also see is envy. We all believe in true capitalism, and there is nothing bad about making money, about earning, because it's a responsibility, and it's about self-responsibility, and it's about achievement. And the achievement principle is something that we have forgotten in Europe. Thanks to socialized healthcare, thanks to all those welfareisms, achievement principle, thanks but no thanks. With a minimum wage, why should I go and work? There are no incentives for those people left anymore. As long as the state can provide everything, and this is the consequence, the negative consequence that we face. All these goodies have to be paid by at least somebody. And what is the third largest city or French population now in Europe? Where it is? It's in London City. Those people left just because of these tax rates. France down there is below. It's the worst country in Europe. And those guys are not productive. The point is, why are they not productive? If more than 2/3 of the population rely on governments when they seek a job or when they work for the government as bureaucrats, as teachers, as in publicly owned companies. I mean, this is impossible. So 2/3 of the population depend directly on government. Of course, they vote what they voted for. And there is no way that they become productive again. This is what you see all over Europe. And if you look at the next, this is balanced budgets. I mean, this is literally not existing. And if you look at the debt levels, there's only one country which is positive. The rest is all heavily indebted. And we have 5 countries that are really a huge problem. It's Greece, of course. We don't even talk about Greece anymore because the next bailout, trust me, will be hidden in the money that is sent down to Greece for to solve the so-called migration crisis. No way. Spain has done part of their homework. They have done structural reforms on the labor market. They have opened the labor market. They have been more flexible. They allow people to be fired, enterprises to fire people now. Italy has a huge problem in their debt levels. The productivity that I was talking before, the 21% that they lag behind, is the level of 30 years ago. Imagine that, 30 years ago. And if we look at the debt levels, not only of the private households, but of the enterprises, they are now 201 billion euros, and which is comprised of 12% of all loans. Average in a healthy society, you have 3 to 4%, just to give you the balance, the idea. I'm not talking about Portugal. This is insane, and it's really a big problem. But France is not talked about, and this is something that we should all consider. Unemployment rate. I mean, you all know the crazy high unemployment rates for especially youth in Spain, in Greece. It's above the 50% for youth. Here you only have the unemployed in general. This has been touched upon by Kalpeter, but just to give you a number, in Austria, the Austrian budget will have to, or each asylum seeker costs the Austrian budget or the Austrian taxpayer 11,000 euros, which is like $13,000 on the national level. You don't look into the regional level, and you don't look into the local level. So add these costs, and eventually everything has to be paid by the taxpayer. And here, I mean, this is a true disaster. What Adam Smith has said is so simple and so true, but it doesn't work anymore in Europe. And the second crisis that we don't even see, and that is not even priced into this disaster, is the security issues that we face. It started out with the Ukraine, and now we have the terrorist attacks, and there is no way that there will be a solution for that. So this is a big problem in combination with the financial crisis. That has been triggered in Europe, and to be honest, structural reforms would be the only solution for Europe, but those hurt. And of course, people are, vote when they are given handouts. And this is what our politicians understand perfectly well. And the more centrally this is planned in Brussels without responsibility on the national and regional levels, the worse it becomes. Don't get me wrong, I love my continent. But first I'm a Tyrolean, and then I'm nothing, and then maybe I'm a European. So the idea is competing regions would be a good solution for Europe, because we have seen Europe and other parts of the world always been more successful when the economic areas or the economic zones were larger than the political areas. And by that you can have a lot of competition. And this is what Europe needs. Otherwise, with those growth rates that I presented, we're doomed. And after all, it's too beautiful to give it up. So this is why we fight for freedom, and why we actually warn about those stupid politics that is being made in Europe and that don't come across the pond. Thank you.
All right, and in this portion, we're going to do the Q&A. So we're going to ask the panel to come on back up.
No.
We need 4.
I'll manage. Thank you.
So this mic is going to float across you.
Yeah, sure.
Hello. Does anyone have a question for our guests? All right.
In case you've forgotten the names of the speakers, we're handing out the schedule. Sorry for the delay on that.
This is a question for Mr. Schwartz. I really enjoyed your talk. Why is Chancellor Merkel doing that with the migrants? I mean, I know from my point of view, you hear that there's not enough workers in Germany. That there's a lot of open space as far as jobs or needing to grow a population. Is that her motivation? I mean, if they're shipping people back out, then that doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense to me too. And I don't have, frankly spoken, I don't have an answer. I have an hypothesis, but not an answer. My guess is that there are several reasons that could have contributed to this development. The first was that she simply tried to get, this is the domestic position, that she has been heavily criticized for other things that she did, and she wanted to have beautiful pictures with nice young people, and she is the savior of the poor refugees, and they can all come to Germany. And so Germany, which was the former Nazi country, now is the country which is most open, the most open country of all countries in accepting everybody. So this could have been a reason. I don't think that it's not enough to explain it. The second thing is, was it, you can see from domestic point of view, it's the first time that the Christian democratic politician has an overwhelming support from all leftists in Germany. No? Because for the moment there are no more, let's say, uncontested leftist icons in the world. No? Because if you say Fidel Castro, the people would say, please stop it. Yeah. Or North Korea, you cannot present them. So for the moment, you have only two icons of the left. One is a Christian democratic chancellor in Berlin, and the other is a pope in Rome. Yeah? So the leftists support them, yeah, and they see that their ideas now are realized by people coming out of the conservative movement and of conservative traditions, which is, I think, a very, very difficult situation for all of us. Then the third element, I think that we should not exclude that there is foreign interference in the whole thing. So we don't have the proofs. What we know is that in February, March last year, in most of the Arab countries, in the newspapers of the neighboring countries to Syria, but also in Syrian newspapers, they were from one day to the other published articles in which there was exactly described what happens in Germany, how asylum seekers are treated there, how are the ways to get there and whatever. So this, in a certain sense, triggered this mass movement, which started from one day of the other. So I have a neighbor in Croatia, and she was in Macedonia in June last year, and she came home and she told us, imagine, I saw from the border, we crossed the border from Greece to Macedonia, and I saw thousands and thousands of people marching. Yeah? This was the beginning. It was really, this was like this, you see this television series, what is this called, about the zombies, no? Walking Dead, yeah? Going on the highways, yeah? Scenes like this happened in summer last year, no? And the first reaction, the let's say sensitive reaction, would have been of a responsible politician: stop it from one moment to another. Please stop it now, because if not, we have a lot of problems. And not to say them, come please, because we want to show you a friendly face. So this is not responsibility. The man who really profited from the whole situation has his seat in Moscow in the Kremlin, because nobody is talking more about the Ukrainian war. Putin is back in the business in the Middle East. The Americans are cooperating with him in Syria. Yeah? So, for him the situation was an improvement. That I would not say that it was Putin who put it in motion, but I would not even exclude it.
Thank you so much.
I will stand. I got a couple of questions. So first for Hannes, if I'm pronouncing that. I have no chance of pronouncing your last name, so I'm going to just stick to your first name. So Swedes in America, according to one of your graphs, outperform Native Americans or other Americans, the average American. Why is that? I can understand why Swedes in the United States would outperform Swedes in Sweden, but why do they even outperform U.S. citizens?
I think actually it's because of their strong work culture and sense of civic duty. I do not think that nations of one ilk or another are better or worse than any else, but they have different heritages. And there is in Sweden and in the Nordic countries very strong respect for work and discipline and so on. And I have sometimes made the remark also, just to use the opportunity to add to my presentation, that one of the reasons why the Nordic countries have done quite well and why it is good to live there, and I can bear witness to that, being Nordic myself, is that there is a strong social consensus. These are very homogeneous societies. People recognize one another. They respect one another. They have a shared heritage and so on. And the Swedes that left Sweden and went to the U.S., they brought with them some of this ethic, I believe, and that's the reason why the average income of the Swedes in Sweden, in the U.S. Is $58,000 US dollars. The average income in the U.S. at that time was 48, and the average income in Sweden was 38,000. You know, these are extraordinary figures, but the explanation for the difference between the Americans and the Swedes is, I think, that they brought with them the ethic, but the difference definitely between the Swedes in Sweden and the Swedes in North America is the institutions in America.
But this is still a little confusing to me, because we're probably now talking about third generation Swedish Americans. So these traditions have survived 3 generations, even 4?
I would think so, yes, and this happens with other societies and other groups in society, that some just do better than others, and the reason for that cannot be that they are in any way genetically better or better equipped or anything like that. It has something to do with what they bring with them, and you can see it very well. I used to be a visiting scholar at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and one could observe how the Vietnamese and immigrants brought with them a sense of the future and a strong crave for saving. What is really the characteristic of the middle class? I think it is a propensity to save, and an interest in educating one's children. Those are the two middle-class values that constitute a middle class, but not really income in terms of money or anything like that. And the Vietnamese, they brought it with them to America from the other side of the world, and I think the Swedes did from Europe.
Okay, but the first two reasons you gave were a sense of community and belongingness. That sounds like collectivism rather than individualism. I would have thought that those values would actually mitigate against economic success in America.
Well,
there's a lot of socialists in Minnesota, for example, and they tend to be Swedes.
Right, yes, but I think we have to make a very strong distinction between enforced solidarity and spontaneous solidarity. And one example of this is, of course, the Jews in America and elsewhere, that they are a closely knit society, and that has helped. That has enabled them to achieve a lot of things, because I did my doctoral dissertation on Friedrich von Hayek, and the main conclusion of my thesis was that Hayek explained one extraordinarily important fact. It is how much we can achieve together, surprisingly, given how little we know, each of us. And how do we do that? By availing ourselves of all kinds of social mechanisms, first and foremost, of course, the price mechanism, but also traditions and other such things. And I think that solidarity, if it is spontaneous, is a good thing. And inclusion, respecting and recognizing other people for being your fellow beings, being citizens in the same kind of society as you are in yourself. And this is precisely what we were discussing, also integration in Europe. You know, America is the great melting pot. America succeeded in the 19th century in integrating all those immigrants that came to America, whereas we see now a failure of this in Europe, a failure that really, when I was listening both to Barbara Kolm and to Karl Peter, made me think that we in Iceland had better try to stick our foot into that of the North American neighbors, namely Canada and the US, instead of to Europe, because it seems to me that the barbarians are at the gate in Europe.
All right, thank you. Joe gets away with following up questions, so.
Thank you very much. My wife and I are delighted really to be here. These were excellent presentations. Before my question, I just want to mention that we had an exchange student in high school from Sweden, and he was terrific. And he was far above everybody in the class because you have a much better education system in Sweden, far superior. And I also got him a job at McDonald's, and he said that's the best work program that he's had. Now he has his daughter working at Burger King. He lives in Gothenburg, Sweden. He's now a senior vice president of Volvo, and the car that won first prize in the Detroit Auto Show was his car. And so we're really impressed with people like this. And but the education system is far superior than ours. I'm really happy to be here with people that think alike. We think alike here, and that's a problem. How do we expand this and get others to do this? I go to church, I go to the Rotary, I go to the coffee shop, and nice people, but they're clueless. They don't know this stuff. I go to the university and I meet with people a lot smarter than I am. They're clueless because Bible is the New York Times and a few other things, and we send our kids to the university and they come back supporting Bernie Sanders. And so how do we get your message across? And just one final comment on refugees, and we all ought to care about refugees. I spent a lot of time in Lebanon and Syria. I'm supposed to be in Lebanon now, and it's just tragic. But the answer is not to send them to Europe. It's not to send them to the United States. The most compassionate thing we should do is build safe zones over there and keep them there, because they're going to be needed to rebuild their countries. Why aren't we pushing hard for that? The Obama administration is opposed to that, but we ought to do that. And so I want to enlarge our circle, and I don't know why your message is why you aren't spending full time at our universities, and they ought to hear this message too, because the clueless professors don't know this. Anyway, anyone can respond to my rambling here.
Well, thank you. I just can only bring our European example. We started our roadshow 9 years ago in 4 cities, in Berlin, in Vienna, in Bratislava, and in Prague. And we had 7 international speakers joining us, and we had an overall of 300 people in all 4 cities in the audience. You know, just only because one city was really extremely good. But in the others, we had people like Jose Piñera, the architect of the Chilean pension reform, and you know, who really brought about this change in his country, speaking in front of 7 people. And this was, you know, a tragedy. So now the good news is, after 9 years, we're in 40 countries, in 45 cities, and have thousands of people in attending this program. And then this is why we thought, well, it's time that we bring Europeans, US speakers to Europe, and we try to do this now in the US. But, you know, only on a fact-based driven information thing. You know, these are the facts, these are the numbers, these are the figures. And when you could present them, then, you know, all of a sudden people say, hey, yes, this is wrong. And I think the only thing we can do together with everybody here in this room and everybody who is joining us, present the facts and figures, and never become tired of saying the truth, because even if it's inconvenient, but the truth has to be spoken out. And eventually our ideas, the ideas of freedom and the ideas of liberty and the ideas of responsibility are the better ones. It's just a point that we have to win this fight against media, as you pointed out, and by doing and in winning that, we have to just voice ourselves, and we have to be strong and not give in and not give up. And I think it's a continuous challenge, and that we have to fight together. It's tough, but it's also fun. It's good, because eventually capitalism is a really nice thing. I'm proud to be a capitalist. I like it. It's good. And, you know, if we tell this the next generation and tell them, you know, there is no free lunch. And this is what we try to also give this message to the students. It's tough. It's not sexy, but we try to wrap it up in a nice way. It's always easier to redistribute than to earn. And as long as we don't tell this, and as long as it's not transparent, and this is why I say, you know, facts and figures, and there is no manna from heaven, and eventually we will hit the wall. And, you know, I hate to be one of these negative people. We libertarians, we believe in innovation and in creativity. We are positive. So this is why we will find a solution and a way out of it. But it's a tough walk and fight.
Can I just add one observation to the excellent comments by Barbara Kohm about this? And you really asked a very important question. I think that one key answer is that people realize that we do not stand for the vested interests of the rich. We stand for the opportunity of people to become rich. I do not regard myself, being a strong supporter of capitalism in Iceland, as a spokesman for the rich in Iceland. I'm a spokesman for those people who, with their own hands and with hard work, want to improve their conditions for themselves and their families without harming anyone else, and want to be left alone by the tax collectors, and want to create something and want to enjoy life. So I think that's very important, that we do not stand for wealth, but for opportunity. We do not stand for vested interest or monopoly, but for competition and openness, and being able to receive people and include them in what we are doing. There is also, actually, in my opinion, the best the best program for us is an essay by Hayek called Intellectuals and Socialism, where he really underlines and stresses that for the young people, they have to regard liberty as an adventure, as something, a courageous act, as a utopia, something that is a dream, but it's a dream that can be fulfilled and realized and not a castle in the air. So I think those two answers would be those that I would give to your pertinent question.
Just bearing on what you have said, there is a certain culture that a society has that drives it towards capitalism, a liberal society, one in which there is competition, etc. So for you look at Egypt and Korea in 1950, Egypt is the same, Korea is a first world country. There are other examples of this as you pointed out. Looking at Europe, which looks to be fracturing, the Brits are talking about Brexit. Why does Germany stick it out? Why aren't the Germans saying, what's in it for us? Why do we have to support the rest of the world? After all, they would trade with everybody, and they might say, well, we're not Portugal, we're not Greece. We subscribe to these values, as do some other countries, but let everybody do their thing.
Well, the answer is quite easy. If I would say in Germany, I want to defend German interests, everybody else would say that I'm a Nazi. I mean, there was a kind of let's say, over-re-education of the Germans after 45. Yeah, they were the most nationalist and most violent nation of Europe, and now they are the most, let's say, the weakest, the less inclined to defend their values, to defend their traditions. Imagine an American politician at a public manifestation of leftists behind a banner where it's written, the US is the last shit of the world. So it could not happen, not even with Sanders. It happened in Germany. The vice president of the Bundestag was present and was in a manifestation where such a banner was shown. Yeah, so there is a kind of let's say of auto-destruction, yeah, of cultural and national suicide going on in this country, which then creates other problems. And I think that if we don't start to understand, yeah, that we have to defend our values, also collective values. It's not only about individual choice. It's also about collective identity, which has to be. That it goes in the wrong direction. And I think that there is. I forgot to say that there is maybe a fourth element, which I forgot to mention before, regarding Merkel's policy. We should not forget that there is a strong tendency in the European Union to centralize all these processes. Yeah, so to overcome the nation states. Yeah, to create always more superstructures of non-responsible technocrats or half politicians and whatever who take the real decisions. In order to do this, the biggest obstacle on the way is the still existing national state. Yeah? So great demographic changes inside the European Union are weakening the national states, and the new immigrants, they have no contact to these traditions and to these values, so they are quite open whatever is offered to them. And this also could be an element which goes in this direction. And this is not only a speculation. I could quote it once in an article about this two persons, the former Swedish commissioner Cecilia Malmström, and the certain, I think his name is Sullivan, an Irish Catholic politician. who was absolutely for the destruction of the national states. Yeah? He says that what we need is the destruction. We have to overcome these national traditions because they create only problems inside the European Union. But quite the contrary is clear. We can only preserve Europe if we stick to these values and if we have a certain feeling for these traditions. And I think that's very important.
Thank you so much.
In 1971, when I was on R&R basically from Vietnam, I had a chance to spend a lot of time in Japan, mingling with the people. And one day I went to this museum, which was filled with schoolgirls, and I was the only guy there, and struck up a conversation with them. And they basically told me that they were in school, and I got told by them they were jealous of the American school system because we got 3 months off during the summer, and they went to school basically 46 weeks out of the year. In your 4 countries, what is the typical school year like, and what is the typical school day like? Because the Japanese kids told me they were in school 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, 46 weeks of the year. They got 2 weeks off around Christmas time, and then when their 3 semesters had semester break, they got 2 weeks off 3 times a year. But the rest of the year, they're going to school 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. What are your elementary and high school hours?
Well, I started right away with Austria and Germany, and I think it's same or even worse in France, Italy. Those places, first of all, 5 days per week at a max, and then it's as a max of 8 hours per day, and then you have 2 months summer holidays. You have 2 weeks of winter holidays. You have a spring break of a week. You have Easter holidays of 10 days, and then you have a whole bunch of national holidays. And this is, also something very typical in in Europe. You have nations that have like 10 national holidays, and then you have nations that have 20 national holidays in addition, and then you have religious holidays. So it's an average minimum 3 months per year, if not 4 months per year. But the worst thing is our teachers. Those work a max of 20 hours per week, and because our unions are so strong, and this is the welfareism that costs us a lot of money. Sorry for being so long, but
Thank you. Well, as I show you in my picture, the state of schools in Argentina is very bad. I mean, classes run from March to November. There are three months of vacations. Also, there are a lot of holidays, even invented holidays a couple of years ago, and so we are close to 20 national days of for many silly reasons. But the worst thing is that probably schools, I mean, there are exceptions, of course, and there are very good private schools, but most of the public schools are basically deposits for people, so they can stay there for certain hours. For the poor kids, for the poor people, probably they can be relatively fed there. That's it. The levels of literacy are going down. The analphabetism is rampant. And also the level of programs of the schools, of the programs, there is no freedom at all. You have to teach what the Ministry of Education forces you to teach. So basically, the problem is not only, as politicians say, we have to build more schools. No. The problem is that even if we had terrific schools and with great buildings, they will be feeding the children the wrong knowledge. So also that is a very, very big problem. The collapse of Argentina started with the degeneration of the school system and education. So it's a very big problem now.
Scandinavia is different.
Well, I think actually Barbara has described the system also in the Scandinavian countries. We have a lot of free time, although the education system there, as was pointed out earlier, is quite good, and the Scandinavians, they value education. But I wanted to add one observation to all this. because I may not have emphasized it, and it ties up with your question and my talk before. It ties a bit, but I may not have stressed it enough. If we look at the difference between Europe or European Union, let's say the European Union, the 28 countries in the European Union and the 50 states in the US, then we see that the living standards of the poor are roughly similar in the better of the European countries to those in the US. So the poorest part of the population, roughly similar quality of life and income. The difference between the US and the better placed European states is that there are many more well-off people, many more rich people in the US. And why is that? Why are people better off? Edward Prescott, the Nobel laureate in economics, he has done a lot of research on this, and his answer is quite clear. It is because the Americans work harder than the Europeans. They work longer hours, they have a stronger work ethic, there are fewer idlers there than there are in Europe. I think that's a very simple answer to that question. Then some people in Europe say, well, this means that they work too hard and the quality of life is not as good as it is in Europe, and we can enjoy ourselves and drink the wine at night and chat with one another and so on. But they don't realize that there is a fundamental error in this answer, and it is that Europe is able to do all that in the US as well. If you don't want to work in the US much, or if you don't want to work long hours, you are perfectly able to do so. You just take on a job of that kind. But what is different between the US and Europe is that in the US you have the opportunity to become better off by working harder, which you do not have as much in Europe because the labor market is so strict and heavily regulated. There is so much unemployment and so on. So the opportunity to improve your living standards has been taken away from the Europeans, but it still exists here in the US, and this explains how much better off the US people are.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have a question from online, somebody watching our live stream from Abby B. She says, how do we get these messages across to developing countries? They feel, or she feels, that they're being used as pawns to legitimize wrong science and global control.
Sorry, what was the last?
She says she feels that they are being used as pawns to legitimize wrong science and global control. So.
Okay. Well, it's a good question. I don't know. Perhaps certain countries, probably due to certain geopolitical situation, can be part of bigger schemes. But in any case, I mean, most of the countries, and in South America, in Latin America, you found many of those countries are poor because of their own wrongdoings, and their destiny is also in their hands. There are very positive trends, I would say, nowadays, and these ideas are being promoted and are reaching more and more people in every country. In my own country, in Argentina, last year we had presidential election. A much more pro-market government is now in charge. Many positive developments in Brazil, even though now there's turmoil, but there's a lot. The most Googled economist in Brazil is Ludwig von Mises. That tells you a lot, which is one of the most important Austrian economists. So a very, very libertarian economists. That tells you a lot. I mean, this internet has helped us a lot. The so-called sharing economy is helping us a lot, because it's not sharing economy. I mean, you can call it sharing economy, rainbow economy, or whatever, but it's free market economy. And those developments, young people with their cell phones do a lot of things. You can work for Uber, and now if you have a car, you can rent your one room in your house, or your house if you live for a couple of weeks or days. You can do many things, and that's really the market working. That's helping us a lot. Entrepreneurship in the developing countries the rate of entrepreneurship is higher than in most of the developed countries. So there are positive signs. I would say that of course we have to continue working hard to promote these ideas. There's a lot to do, obviously, but the trends, I think, are working in our favor.
I would just like to add one short observation. I have, even if I am a native-born Icelander, and I'm a professor at the University of Iceland, and I teach political philosophy there, I've spent a lot of time in Latin America. And the common error of at least Latin American intellectuals is that they blame the Americans for everything that is more or less self-inflicted. The gringos, they are used as an excuse for not working hard enough. And if they really want to see the culprit, then they should look into a mirror, those people. I mean, Karl Marx, I teach Karl Marx at my university, and I go through his theories, and he said one thing which was quite interesting. It was the liberation of the working class has to be the work of the working class itself. And I say the same about the developing countries. Their development has to be brought about by themselves, not by anyone else. And it cannot be brought about by development aid, because that is simply aid towards the elites that usually hamper the people in those countries. So it is extremely important for us to not to give them any aid, but to try to open our borders to their commodities and try to encourage them in developing the institutions that enable people to create wealth, namely private property rights and the rule of law.
Just a short sentence regarding the European Union and America. No? I think that it's obvious that all in all the situation in the United States is still much better than in the European Union. But I think that there is a process of convergence in going on, which makes both systems always more similar. Now, last week I've read in a newspaper that they're introducing a minimal wage of $15 in California. I mean, this is something which not even came in mind to the Greens in Germany, yeah, and that will be a policy in an American state. So I mean, what you had in the last years, and particularly under the Obama administration, was a kind of a particular kind of socialism in the United States, yeah? And that makes it much more similar to the European Union. And I think that the quicker and the better this process is stopped, the better it is for the United States. We have everywhere an expansion of the state and of the government and of regulations and of government interference. It never happened that the state went back. It's always increasing. And we have this. We have a capitalist economy in both on both continents, but this capitalist economy is walking on socialist legs. If you think on the central banks and governmental regulated money supply and whatever. So, in those aspects, no, we are unfortunately, we are much nearer than we sometimes consider.
Only one sentence. I think the problem is to turn down or to decline can go very fast. It's just within a couple of months if the wrong policies are being made. And this is why we try to bring best practices and show that there changes can be done, and we have seen it. Just a simple capital-based pension system, a flat or a simple or a fair tax, or just get rid of all the regulation. And all of a sudden a country booms and is set free. And we have to make sure that people understand that things are there. You just need to grab it and implement it.
Thank you so much.
Can I just strike a note of optimism on this, because there is actually a regular measurement of economic freedom, the index of economic freedom, and what does that tell us? It does tell us that from 1980 to 2010, economic freedom in the world on average increased quite considerably. And also, interestingly, even if it has not increased so fast in the last few years, the financial crisis did not really lead to a great decrease in economic freedom. So there is hope. And the phenomenon that I spoke about before, namely globalization, which is simply a short label for more international free trade, is getting easier and easier, and more countries are joining capitalism. So at the same time as we have to be aware of the dangers, and at the same time as we Europeans have to warn the Americans not to repeat our mistakes and errors, at the same time there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a flicker of hope in the world.
A couple of things. Back in ancient times in America, students during their holidays, high schoolers and college students, would work. And certainly the scientists or the scientific studies, the university students would work at what essentially was an apprenticeship with a variety of companies. I don't know if they still do that. But my other thought is, if government went to zero, the entire population would fall into two categories. One would be communes, and the other would be capitalism. And as soon as the communes starved to death, then it would be 100% capitalism. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Well, I think actually you have quite a deep point that I've thought about a lot, because I just reread Herbert Spencer recently, and he has an interesting chapter in his first book, Social Statics, called "Right to Ignore the State," which is basically the right to opt out of the state. And if you look at it, capitalism is just a framework for choice. And one of the choices we can make is to establish socialist communes and socialist companies that are collectively owned. There is nothing that hinders that in capitalism. And in fact, John Stuart Mill in the 19th century thought that socialism would take over because those worker-owned companies would be much more profitable and productive than companies owned by capitalists. He was, of course, wrong on that. But we have one criterion on how many people would choose socialism. It is the kibbutzim in Israel. And about 6% of the people in Israel, they choose socialism by entering the kibbutzim. And that's, I suppose, what would happen if we had the right to ignore the state. If we could choose, then 94% would choose capitalism and 6% would choose socialism. The data suggests that.
There is nothing to add.
Excellent. I do have one more question from the online. This is from Jürgen Meyer, and this is specifically for Barbara Kolm. It says, are there any libertarian groups, etc., in Austria where I could find like-minded people? I'm located in Graz, G-R-A-Z. Only thing I found so far is a Facebook group with about 16 people.
Well, Jürgen, you're most welcome to, of course, come to Vienna anytime. There are Students for Liberty and already in Graz existing. They are working hard to spread the word. There is a mentee program out there as well. And if you simply contact us in Vienna at the Austrian Economics Center or at the Hayek Institute, we are happy to help you and link you with the right people so that you are not alone. There are plenty of people who just don't even know that they are a libertarian or pro-market. They just don't know it yet. But, you know, eventually it's reason, it's pure reason, and people get it.
Excellent. All right, for time's sake, I'm going to have to end it there. I know that if there's any other comments or questions, Heartland staff and our panel will be here milling around for a little bit. Still plenty of food in the back and beverages. Make yourself comfortable. And if you're driving home, drive safely.
I wanted to just say one thing. We've heard a lot of gloom today, and if you look at the Middle East, it's gloomy. Our huge deficit and so on. I'm glad that, Hannes, you mentioned some hope. I teach graduate students sometimes, And they come in gloomy at first. They're pessimistic. But I don't let them leave the class until they can be a can-do. We can solve these problems. And we ought to, if you read, as we do, history, the terrible things, leaders have emerged. We've got a crisis, and it takes a crisis. That's how we got Churchill. That's how we got Lincoln, and da-da-da-da. And so we ought to think that we can do, and these problems are solved. So, again, thank you all for your